I'm going to call the meeting to order. The first thing we got to do is officially select an interim chair.
Nominate Lou Hopkins to serve as interim chair. Second the nomination.
All in favor?
Aye.
Mr. Ackerson,
Here.
Ms. Bindum, Mr. Fell, Mr. Fitch, Mr. Hopkins,
Here.
Mr. Otto, Mr. Storr, Mr. Trail,
Here.
Mr. Turner,
Here.
Ms. Bindum.
Okay, do we have any changes to the agenda? Okay, approval of the minutes. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes from January 21?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, minutes are approved. Do we have any communications?
There are some associated with cases, so we can read them into the record at that time.
Okay. No continued public hearings, no old business, so new public hearings. The first one is Plan Case 2271M16. And I will briefly remind our audience of our procedures. So we are opening a public hearing in this case. Staff presents. The petitioner, which in this case is the city, can present evidence. Other proponents, opponents, others, repeat the process, then we close the hearing and the commission deliberates. So, staff report.
So this is Plan Case 2271M16. This is a request by the Urbana Zoning Administrator for a map amendment for a number of properties to be changed in their zoning to be consistent with their current use and their designation in the city's comprehensive plan. So how I'll do this is I will just go through each property individually and then state, as opposed to doing the current land use, existing land use, and then future all in the zoning, I'll just address it on each individual property. I think would be the easiest way to present it. This is basically just a process we decided to do, just sort of one update, which is kind of a house cleaning, so to speak, of many properties around the city which seem to have a zoning that didn't quite match their current use or was not consistent with what it calls from the comprehensive plan. Almost all of these properties are city-owned or they are public properties in one capacity or another. There's one exception with a private property on Florida Avenue, which I'll address in a few minutes. So we are just doing this kind of in an omnibus fashion to propose them all at once and just to clean up the zoning for several particular properties. The first property, or I should say that 1603 East Washington, which you'll see in the memorandum packet, is being excluded from this case. We decided at the last minute that it wasn't the right time to propose rezoning this. It is a city-owned property, but we will not be including it in this case for your recommendation to City Council. So the next property is, the first property is 1407 North Lincoln Avenue. Currently, this is a fire station for the Urbana Fire Department. It is zoned R2, which is single-family residential. We're proposing to rezone it to B3. Its designation in the comprehensive plan is institutional, which would be appropriate with its use as a fire station. B3 would allow it to continue to be in compliance and use for that of a fire station. (1101) East University Avenue. This is the headquarters for the Champaign-Urbana Mass Transit District. The headquarters spans over several parcels, and the surrounding parcels are all zoned IN1 light industrial office, except for this individual parcel, which is zoned B3. This was when it was used by a private business a number of years ago, which has since left, and it's used by CUMTD. They have invested in the property. They will be occupying it for the indefinite future, and we were proposing to rezone it to IN1 so it's consistent with its neighboring properties as well as the other properties that house the headquarters. And that would also be consistent with the future land use designation for the area of heavy industrial. The property on 610 South Glover Avenue is, when this picture was taken and when the data that we have in our GIS files still have it listed as mobile home, those sites have all been, those mobile homes have all vacated now. The property is vacant. It is owned by the city. It's zoned R4, which is a medium density, multifamily zoning. The city is proposing to rezone it to IN1, light industrial office, which would allow it to be used for future purposes of maintenance or storage or functions for the Public Works Department. And that would also match the zoning of nearby properties, and also the property's future land use designation in the comp plan. The properties at 909, 911, 913, and 915 North Lincoln Avenue are right near King Park. These properties were all single-family homes until several years ago, where they were demolished as part of the city's blight reduction efforts. And two of the parcels are owned by the city. Two of them are owned by the Park District. The parcels that are owned by the city are leased out to the Park District on a long-term basis, but their current use is for park space. That said, they're still zoned as R2. The proposed rezoning would change these properties to CRE, Conservation, Recreation, Education, which is the designation that we use for all the park space in the city. And that would be consistent with the future land use designation for three of those properties, except for 909, the future land use designation is community business as opposed to park space, but the rezoning would certainly match the current use at least. And its ownership by the city and use by the Park District makes it unlikely to be used by a business anytime in the near future. 1107 East Florida Avenue. This is the one private property on the list. It's an apartment complex that has been around for decades. It's important to remember that this is all one parcel. We're not looking at several parcels, but it came to our attention that it was zoned three different designations, and the property owner fully supports zoning it all to one consistent land use, or I'm sorry, one consistent zoning because it has one land use essentially. The north part, the large majority portion of that property is zoned R5, and that is just above those two lower buildings and everything above. The portion on the south end of the parcel is zoned CRE, Conservation, Recreation, Education. And then the corner of the property on the southwest portion along Cottage Grove Avenue is zoned as R2. That's not used, there are no single-family homes on that portion. It's just used for an access drive, setback space away from the street, and for the part of the parking lot. So the city is proposing, with cooperation of the property owner, to rezone all of that to R5 just to match its current use. And that would be consistent with the designation of multifamily in the comp plan. The property at 501 East Windsor Road. This is Meadowbrook Park. It's if you divide the park sort of in half between the northwest and the southeast, this is the southeastern portion of the park. It's zoned R1, which is single-family residential for low-intensity use. This is owned by the Park District, and it's fully part of Meadowbrook Park, but the city is proposing to rezone it to CRE, Conservation, Recreation, Education, just to make it consistent with the other parcel of the park, the other parcels of the park, and with the future land use, which is also that of park space. This is for 1210 East University Avenue. This property is where the Landscape Recycling Center is located, as well as the firing range for the police station, and there's a old landfill on the site as well. And the city's Arbor Division has several functions here. It's a multi-use property, but the Landscape Recycling Center is the most prominent feature there. The city is proposing to rezone that to AG Agricultural, which would allow it to be better in compliance with the landfill that exists there, as well as the landscaping functions of the site. Its current zoning is that of CRE, Conservation, Recreation, Education, which is kind of meant for more park space as opposed to the purpose that this parcel serves. And the majority of that parcel is designated as heavy industrial in the comp plan, although the northern portion of it is designated as park space as well. With that, there's also the LaSalle criteria, which is from a court case that are criteria that are supposed to be taken into consideration for any rezoning of any property. So the first criteria is that the existing land use and zoning of the nearby property, the factor relates to the degree in which the existing and proposed zoning districts are compatible with existing land uses and land use regulations. For all the properties involved, it was we determined that they are compatible with the surrounding zoning and land use. We found that the existing land use is compatible with nearby properties. The intensity of use would not be changed, keeping the compatibility the same, and we determined that the zoning would be consistent for the current land use and adjacent properties as well. The second criteria is that the extent to which property values are diminished by the restrictions of the ordinance. The difference in the value of the property in its existing zoning and the value it would have if it were rezoned to the proposed district. The fact that all these properties are publicly owned and provide city services determined that the property values aren't taken into can't really be considered because They don't contribute to the tax rolls as it is now, and they are not determined to be put for sale at any time in the future. The property at 1107 East Florida, we determined would benefit from the entire property being zoned for its current use of multifamily residential, as opposed to two portions of it being zoned for differently. So if it had the entire zoning of R5, we feel that it would benefit the property's value. The next two criteria, the extent to which the ordinance promotes the health, safety, morals, and general welfare of the public, and the relative gain to the public as compared to the hardship imposed on the individual property owner. Do the restrictions promote the public welfare in some significant way as to offset any hardship? Staff determined that for these properties that there isn't any hardship that's created by having their zoning match their current use, and that the public welfare is advanced by having a consistent zoning. For the property at 1107 East Florida, it was determined that there's no hardship imposed on the property owner by having the entire site being changed to R5, and that removing the CRE and R2 designations from the two portions of that property would not be a detriment to public welfare either. The fifth criteria is the suitability of the subject property for the zone purposes. That's whether the certain features of the property favor the type, intensity of uses permitted in either the current or the proposed zoning district. The current uses for all the properties we determined, of all the publicly owned properties, be the parcels near King Park, the MTD headquarters, where the landscape recycling center is located, Meadowbrook Park, is that their uses have been put in place for properties in which they are already compatible. So the compatibility of changing the zoning would not be compromised, or the suitability would not be compromised, more specifically. And so we feel that it would be that the subject properties are quite suitable to be zoned for their new designation. For 1107 East Florida, most of the property is already zoned R5, and the uses would match the proposed rezoning of R5, so that is suitable as well. And then the last criteria, the length of time that the property has been vacant as zoned, considered in the context of land development in the area in the vicinity of the subject property. It's a test of the validity of the current zoning district is whether it can be shown that the property has remained vacant for a significant period of time because of restrictions in that zoning district. The properties at Windsor Road and 909 to 915 Lincoln Avenue are park space. The property at 610 South Glover has been vacant, and the homes were removed, so the city may use that for different purposes. So the vacancy of those mentioned properties is intentional for either for public use of some regard. The other properties are not vacant, so they don't really apply to that criteria. So with all that said, the staff recommendation is for the Plan Commission to recommend approval of this multi-part map amendment to the City Council. With that said, are there any questions that you have?
I would like to read the communications into the record.
Oh,
We do have an email from Nathan Todd, who lives on South Pine Circle, indicating support for the rezoning, in particular at 501 East Windsor Road, which is the Meadowbrook Park. There was also an email today from Mr. Tom Bergen regarding the address that we have asked to be withdrawn. So I don't have that one in front of me, but there were two communications as far as I know.
I guess to state that there were 3 communications relating to that I have printed out, but
Okay. Do you want to,
distribute it?
yeah.
Yeah, I certainly can.
Okay, any questions for staff? Okay, oh, you do, go ahead.
Thank you. Will any of the rezonings have any tax or assessment implications?
For 1107 East Florida, the assessment is actually, there was how it came to our attention, or at least in terms of the private assessment for possible transactions or real estate sales or whatever. That's how it was brought to our attention that it might have a different property. So I think the implications for that property would be positive, seeing that the property owner is in support of this action. For the other properties, because they are all owned by the city through either the park or through the park district or MTD, there wouldn't be any particular, because of the zoning the rezoning is intended to match their current use. We didn't foresee any adverse effects on the tax rolls.
Yeah.
I was just curious about the 1210 East University. Why agriculture rather than CRE?
The base with that is there's the uses of that aren't really lending themselves to CRE, which is more meant for park space or for some of the area close to the university. But the main issue with that is that there's no landfill or a retired landfill on that site, which is limited in what land uses can be performed on that site. So AGU is a little more appropriate to accommodate the landfill that exists there.
Yeah.
I just had a quick question about Exhibit G. What's the semicircular? Is that just a mistake, or is that actually a zoning artifact?
He's actually referring to the future land use map, Chris.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. Which part of Exhibit G?
Okay, well,
The semicircle, I believe, is on the future land use map.
Yeah, Exhibit G. Or actually, is that
So
multi-page?
keep going.
Yeah, keep
Oh.
going. Yeah, there.
That is that's a reflection of east of the property is designated for parks, that the semicircle itself is designated for park space, and then to the east of there is designated for mixed residential.
It's showing a potential expansion of Meadowbrook in the future. Potential.
Oh, not in that shape necessarily.
No, as the future land use map, it's conceptual.
Okay.
Going back to Exhibit H to 1210 East University Avenue, the landfill, I understand that there was some interest in trying to put some solar panels in that area. It was just kind of under discussion. Would the zoning of agriculture would it need to be rezoned if they wanted to put solar panels in this area?
I'm not certain that installing solar panels would require a change of zoning, or what zoning is required for.
I believe we would consider solar panels an accessory use, so they would not impact or be impacted by the zoning, the underlying zoning.
Okay. Any comments from the audience? Yeah, come.
I'll sign in first. Well, hi, Commissioners. I'm here to talk about just to give you a little bit of background slightly about the one individual parcel that was taken away from the omnibus package. And that was the one at 1603 East Washington Street. That's the property that has been had been purchased about 5 years ago by the city through CDGB funds and had been in use in the last 4 years or so by the Learman Neighborhood Action Committee in the Learman neighborhood, and has become a community garden. And we are the Learman Neighborhood Action Committee is in the process of doing a couple of interesting things right now. There's been a leadership change. Some of the people that were on the board are moving into higher positions. Robin Arbiter is deciding to step back from active presidency right now. She's been the president for about 5 years or 4 years, actually since the creation of this organization. Also, the Learman Neighborhood Action Committee has completed formulation of 501c3 status. And we were interested in the property potentially as considering doing some fundraising this coming year with the possible idea of purchasing the property. This is kind of informal, but we've talked about it at meetings recently, in the last couple of meetings. And so when we saw that the zoning commissioners were considering doing a zoning map change and moving from B3 to R5, we felt we kind of wanted to put an input into that process before it happened, and we don't have the time right now to address it appropriately because our membership just learned about it basically today. So I did call up Libby Tyler, and she explained a couple of interesting things which I really appreciated, and staff has agreed to withdraw it from the discussion tonight. Probably will come back on a future correction later on. We did find out a couple interesting things. That we found out that we can have the community garden there as an appropriate use of CDBG funded land. So it doesn't necessarily have to become a building construction site for low-income housing. This is what was informally imparted to me as the in my conversation this afternoon. And that may be yet subject to correction, but that was the impression I got. And that it was possible that the city would be interested in, now that the neighborhood association has achieved 501c3 status, that we might be able to enter into a long-term lease of the property. Another possibility that we were considering was whether the developer of the townhome site across the street might want to partner with the LNAC organization to develop that property in some way too, perhaps becoming owners of the property. And if they were to purchase it, the city would regain its money that it would have been spent and could reinvest that money in other projects that have to do with applying the properties to housing needs and shortages of this community. So there are a couple of things that are rather interesting for the future, and so we are very respectful and thank the city for taking it off tonight's agenda, and perhaps this will be something that we can work with you on in the future. One of the things that we suggested was not to consider such a high density development assigned to the property. Currently, staff had offered an R5 designation, and I looked up the differences between the designations. We were kind of hoping for maybe R3. Staff felt that it was maybe too low of a application, and because the properties nearby are either business or R5, that R3 would be too low of a reassignment. But Libby Tyler suggested that maybe R4 would be appropriate, and I would think that might be a useful way to progress in the future. Some of the land uses for R4 do include single family, a duplex, but also such things as um, agricultural, which would probably fit the current community garden use. Also, park is permitted in an R4 designation. And there are other kinds of community-oriented services and service provider buildings, and also educational buildings, and even a fire department or police department station in this area. So we think that there would be a better use than B3 on that corner, which is the entree into a pretty sensitive and committed neighborhood for improvement. So just having said that, appreciate the time for having a little more leeway in talking to you about its future use and its future designation before we just kind of arbitrarily take one step tonight that might perhaps be better thought out if we just had a little more time. So it doesn't actually pertain to a case that's currently before you, but I thought it was important to kind of share that with not only yourselves and why this has occurred. You may not have the background of what happened this afternoon in that conversation, but also let the public know that the Learman Neighborhood Action Committee is still being really proactive. From that community garden in the last year, we served between 550 to 600 individuals and 275 households with fresh produce at no cost. And I think that that is a high use for this neighborhood, probably better than having a gas station or perhaps even a 5-story apartment house. So with that said, I appreciate your time.
One quick question.
Yes.
It is currently B3.
Yes, it currently is.
So what I'm hearing is not opposition to rezoning,
No, it's not.
but question about to what?
To what?
Yeah, okay.
And R4 is not all that far from R5 as far as a choice. You got that. Okay. Yes, sir.
Appreciate your comments. It's always good to know that there are active neighborhoods in our community that want to be heard, and are acting in a very collaborative and positive way with the city. So I commend you for that.
And we have to thank the city ever so greatly, because not only did the city listen to our concerns, but they helped us purchase. They purchased the property for us from the bank. They allowed us to build the community garden there. They installed the spigot that allowed us to water that garden once we got the permission to do it. And the list just goes on and on. They provided us with mulch at no cost. I mean, the city's been very supportive of this particular piece of property. And you know, we've had ups and downs, and it's difficult to get the community members committed, you know, for long term, because it is a transitional community, and a lot of the people who used to live there have moved out because of the demolitions that occurred. So we're down in a population in that community, but once new apartment buildings are built through the Herman and Kittle development program that we expect to occur perhaps starting this next summer, you know, that's going to be a much higher density piece of property, and a community garden may be even yet more important to them. Okay. So thanks.
I move we accept the recommendations to, what's the formal wording? I've got to look at my. I forward this case to the City Council for recommendation for approval.
And we are going to be clear that this is without 1603 East Washington.
Yes.
Okay. Second? Okay, any discussion? Ready for a roll call? Second? Pardon? Yes, Nardi. Yes.
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 February 15th.
So, new business. I will comment that this is not actually a public hearing, but our convention is that we treat it as if it were a public hearing in terms of our general procedure. So we'll go from there.
All right, thank you. This is Champaign County Zoning Board case 819 AT 15, a request by the county zoning administrator to amend section 5.2, 5.2.1, and 6.1.3 of the county zoning ordinance to allow parking garage or lot as a special use in the CR Conservation Recreation County CR District, subject to certain special use conditions. Basically, this is to allow continued use of the county fairgrounds parking by Carl Hospital and the their bus shelters they have there, as well as future expansion of that parking. So these county cases are of interest to the city in the extent that they'll affect zoning and land use development within a mile and a half of the city, and in this case adjacent to the city. So Plan Commission should review to make sure there's consistency between the county and the city regulations in the areas where they overlap. And make a recommendation to City Council whether or not to protest this county text amendments. In the case that the city adopts a protest, the county board would be required to have a 3/4 supermajority in order to pass this text amendment. So the proposed amendment would amend 3 sections of the county zoning ordinance. Section 5.2 is their table of uses. It would add parking garage or lot as a special use in the county CR district. Section 4.2.1.c discusses principal uses and limits properties to only one principal use, and then it lists a few different exceptions to that. So this amendment would list parking garage or lot as an exception. It would allow that as a second principal use on a lot under certain conditions. And then finally, section 6.1.3 of the county ordinance, it lists the standard conditions for special uses. So that includes for fairgrounds and for parking garage or lot. So this first part, there's some text. It says it would add the standard condition to fairgrounds that would require site design, land management, and stormwater management designs shall provide effective site drainage, shall meet or exceed state and federal water quality standards, shall protect downstream drainage patterns, shall provide for stream flows that support healthy aquatic ecosystems, shall minimize the impacts on adjacent properties, and cause no more harm than minimal disturbance of the stream corridor environment, and wherever possible, shall preserve existing habitat, enhance degraded habitat, and restore habitat. So that's a proposed condition that is currently not applicable to county fairgrounds parking. And the other sections we discussed. I guess another point to make is that the parking garage or lot would only be allowed in the CR district, basically only on a public fairgrounds, provided that fairgrounds was established in October 10th, 1973, and provided that that public fair is held at that fairgrounds, or the special use permit shall become void. So that is the purpose of that is to limit this to only be applicable to the county fairgrounds right next to the city. And then the last addition to section 6.1.3 for parking lot as a special use, it would basically say that parking areas may be used for parking not otherwise related to a fairground, and non-fairground parking may be limited to parking for a single other non-fairground use or to multiple other non-fairground uses, and may include construction and use of related passenger waiting buildings. Also, traffic impacts shall be considered. So let's just dive into some of what that means. Basically, we're looking at the county fairgrounds by Carl Park and by Carl Hospital and by the Crystal Lake Park. So here's an aerial photo. You can see Kohler Avenue's on the west of the fairgrounds here. Fairview is on the south, and those streets are in the city. The fairgrounds itself are not. The blue-green highlight here shows the existing county fairgrounds parking. This area is all used for the county fair during that week or so when that's in session. It's also used for various recreational events, agricultural shows, races, things like that throughout the year. But for the majority of the year, this parking is actually used by Carl Hospital for their employees. And Carl has 4 bus shelters. Here's 1, 2, 3, 4 along this road that goes through the parking. And those 4 shelters were built, are not allowed as an accessory use under the current county zoning ordinance. So the reason for this amendment is to technically allow for those, and by allowing them, we can also allow, or the county can also allow for expansion of the parking at the fairgrounds. So Exhibit B shows the plan for a new parking area to be installed north of the existing parking area, just off of the drive off of Kohler. And when that is installed, they will also install in this southeast area a drainage basin, which will capture water from both the new parking and the existing parking lot. It will capture it, filter it, and release it at a controlled rate. And that water gets released into Crystal Lake and the saline branch then. So that's really the purpose of the amendment. Again, it would only apply in the county on this particular property. Comprehensive plan goals. There's a few related goals from Urbana's comprehensive plan. Goal 6, preserve natural resources, including air, water, and land, in environmentally sensitive areas. So this would help protect water quality. Goal 17, minimize incompatible land uses. Promote development and design controls to minimize those concerns. And goal 21, identify and address issues created by overlapping jurisdictions in the city's ETJ. Coordinate with the county on issues of zoning and subdivisions. So those goals would all be furthered by this amendment. In terms of zoning impacts, basically, as I mentioned, the purpose is just to bring this second use of this parking into compliance with county codes. City staff had worked with the county zoning administrator. Originally, he had proposed to allow a hospital or clinic as a use in the county CR district. We thought that would not be appropriate, so we asked them to change it. So parking lot was the second principal use instead of hospital. And additionally, this will allow for other entities, such as the Park District, to use this parking in addition to the county and Carl. The practical impact, basically just allowing the bus shelters and the future expansion and the installation of the drainage protection. So if this is to be approved, the next step would be a special use permit before the county board. And at that point, the city would be able to review the final plans for the parking and for the drainage, and we would provide comments to the county. We don't have an official protest of special uses, but they do take our comments into account. So, having said that, staff recommendation is to defeat resolution of protest for the proposed county zoning ordinance amendment. And just to let you know, the county zoning administrator and the Champaign County Fairgrounds Association board members are at the county environmental and land use committee meeting, which is happening right now, so they're unable to be here. But I'll be happy to answer questions.
Any questions?
Just could you clarify, the proposed expanded parking is already within the fairgrounds property?
Yes, that's correct. It's
Yeah, I just want to make sure I understood. So
Sure.
whose idea was the water basin? Was that part of the initial proposal, or did that come out in the discussions with the city?
It was part of the proposal by the time it got to the city. So it was between the Fairgrounds Association and Carl.
It's a good addition. I think this is one of my major concerns about any additional parking, looking at the amount of parking that's there, is what's going on with the water. But if you're able to take care of some of the water problems around Crystal Lake, it looks like, well, that just answered my question. Thank you. Don't want to make a comment.
I have a couple questions. First, has anyone talked to the Park District about this? About the basin and whether this fits or conflicts with the water management issues and plans they have for Crystal Lake?
We have spoken with the Park District, and the Fairgrounds Association and their engineer has also spoken with the Park District separately. So I think any concerns the Park District has are being addressed, and really this is a win for the Park District right now. This is all sheet flowing into pipes that go directly into the lake.
So the Park District has expressed support
Yes.
for this, that the way it's being constructed and the other has addressed their concerns. Not that their concerns have just been heard, but,
Yes,
okay.
they are supportive.
Second question I have, there's a lot of jumping back and forth in language between parking lot and parking garage and lot. Is this, I mean, it seems benign enough, basically bringing something into conformance with, in large measure, what they're already doing. But the parking garage language concerns me. Does this, in essence, allow them now to apply for a special use permit to construct a parking garage? Since I'm assuming Carl is doing the construction here.
Yes.
Okay.
So yes, you're correct in both counts. I believe parking garage or lot was already a principal use in their table of uses. So they're just adding the S under county CR to that table. And that's why they're using that designation.
So you're saying these amendments would allow a parking garage as a special use in this area?
Yes, it would allow for them to apply for a garage, yes.
Why does the language bounce back and forth between lot and garage?
I couldn't tell you. It's just the way the county zoning administrator authored the language.
Is there any practical effect to why, if it's garage is mentioned in some sections and not others? I'm just trying to get to, I don't necessarily have any, I mean, it's basically currently being used as a lot, and the addition of a drainage basin is great, and even some slight expansion of the current surface lot. But if this is, you know, the nose of the camel under the tent for parking garage construction, that seems like a whole different issue.
Well, all I can tell you is I find it doubtful that there would be a garage on county property. That would be a significant investment. I don't think Carl would be willing to make that.
So that's we just don't think they'd spend the money?
Correct.
Anybody else? I'm also concerned about the garage. Because this is not a public hearing, remind me, there's been no notification of adjacent property owners, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So, because this is coming to us from the county for an opportunity of resolution of protest, because it's not actually in the city of Urbana. So it comes to the Plan Commission, but not as a public hearing. So, yes, I mean, one could ask a whole lot of questions, but that's where we are. So what concerns me is that, given the language, a parking garage could be built. And although I haven't gone back and read it again in detail, it would appear that there would be no written criteria or limits on a parking garage because it would be a special use permit.
Well, the county could certainly impose limits, and I would imagine they would have a notification requirement for special use permits, as all of the municipalities do.
Is, given the way the county is writing this, they are allowing themselves the option of a parking garage. And they're allowing themselves that option without any a priori mass, setback, height, whatever limits of any kind. Is that correct? Am I?
Well, the county CR standards would still apply for setback.
And do we have any clue what those
Sure.
might be?
In the county conservation recreation district, let's see, maximum height 35 feet, required
Okay.
yard 85 feet. I'm
Th-
sorry.
85 feet is what yard?
That's actually for a major street. So the required yards are based on what type of street is near it. So for a minor street, 55 feet is the required front yard.
Okay, so a parking garage could be maybe 4 levels if we had a clever engineer.
Yeah.
And, but probably 3, and it would have to be 50 feet back from the street.
Yes.
Okay. I think that's relevant, I agree, it's unlikely, but the, ignoring what the rules are and what could happen, I think
Well,
we should take.
our assumption that it's unlikely, right? They've already built one parking garage in the area, obviously on property that they owned. Well, two parking garages in the area. And having been a sufferer in those parking garages, they're usually quite full. So I'm not sure, simply making the assumption that we believe it's unlikely that they would do it. I actually feel a little more apprehensive because they specifically put parking garage in there. You know, it could quite easily, they put some significant limitations to make sure it only applied to this parcel. I don't think it would have been very difficult to have placed some limitations, but said this is limited only to surface parking.
So I've been reading through this again, and looking at the limitation they're putting in section 4.2.1.c, and that's where it says parking lot and related passenger waiting buildings may be allowed in the CR district. So my reading of this is parking garage or lot is the notation they have in the table of uses. But when they get to the specific uses in section 4 and section 6, they're only talking about parking lots. I'm just reading through the proposed language on page 2 of our memo, page 2 and 3. So, yeah, one way forward could be to provision any protests, or to say that you would protest if they do not limit or do not prohibit a garage at this location.
But what you just read suggests that their intent is not to allow a garage at that location, correct?
Yes, that's my belief.
I don't have it in front of me. Has anybody else looked at it?
Let me pull it up.
Could I pose a question here? Jeff, if Carl does elect to build a parking garage, what would be the steps that they would need to make, and does the city have any jurisdiction over this at all?
So they would need to apply for a special use with the county zoning board, and those go through the county zoning board of approvals, or zoning board of appeals, then through the county environment and land use committee, and then to the county board. We do not have any protest right or jurisdiction over this parcel, but we would have opportunity to provide comments. Basically, that's it.
Just to follow up, what are our options here with regard to defeat a motion of protest? Can we edit some of this?
Certainly. I believe you would just say you could move to defeat the motion subject to the condition that, and then add a condition. Yep, exactly.
And so the language that says parking lot in
does the mention of lot in the language preclude parking garage? Since they're, often this is construction, so that we're reading it as parking lot excludes garage, but is that the actual case? Would that be the actual legal construction, the actual legal interpretation of that language?
So I'm looking up the definition in the county zoning ordinance here. It says parking garage or lots, a lot, court, yard, or portion thereof used for the parking of vehicles containing one or more parking spaces together with means of access to a public way. So the definition seems like it would limit it.
Do they have a specific, that's parking garage and lot. Do they have one specifically for parking lot?
No, they do not.
So,
I wonder if under the rules of construction, they would simply say, this would also allow garage, since it's certainly easy to read it that way, that when you look at it, their intent is to do so. Even if their intent is to do so, have they effectively done it, is my question.
I hear you. I would sort of welcome a motion. I don't think we have a motion on the floor on this one, do we?
Nope.
And maybe we can word it in a way that follows
Correct me.
our intent.
Correct me if I'm wrong. For instance, I might be tempted to word such a motion to say that we're okay with this as long as the word garage is removed. But in this instance, since the standard category is parking garage and lot, do we really have that option?
No, I think a safer way would be to request that a garage is explicitly prohibited under, let's see. Yes, under section 4.2.1C and 6.1.3.
Whether it refers to parking lot, and to clarify that means parking lot and garage and excluding parking garage.
Or that parking lot is limited to surface parking?
Yes, I think that's better, because garage, we don't have a reason to limit roof. Well, we might, but I don't think that's what we're talking about. I think what we're talking about is multi-story parking. So surface parking. Yeah. So we need a motion if we're going to do this. Go ahead.
Oh, no, just asking, he was saying that he thinks a safer way would be to explicitly prohibit parking garage.
Well, I think what we're suggesting is that garage may not be quite the right word,
Okay.
because garage could mean a single-story roofed space, covered parking.
And they
And I
do
think
have,
what we're concerned about is a multi-story structure.
right,
Okay.
and they
So-
do
so-
have garages on the county fairgrounds
Yeah, so,
separately.
and from the county's point of view, it's quite plausible that that's what they think of as garage being, because the county probably doesn't think a whole lot about multi-story parking garages. So maybe what we can do is either, well, one way to construct it would be to defeat a resolution of protest if it is explicit that parking is limited to single-story or surface parking.
Is this a possibility that we might continue this to the next meeting with the specific request of the staff that they talk to the county and get an agreed set of language that might, especially if their intent was never to authorize a garage anyway, slightly better set of language that might address our concerns and that they might find to be perfectly fine?
Sure. So just to give you a little background on their process, this has been through County ELUC, back to the County Zoning Board, and then back up to the County ELUC.
ELOC is Environmental Land Use Committee.
Yep. And they're hearing it twice, so they're opening tonight, and then in 2 weeks, they will be making their final recommendation. But we still have the opportunity at this point to suggest different language, which they would bring forward in 2 weeks. So yes, we are able to have the language changed.
I sense that might be a good strategy.
Just for clarification, what's the county board date on this? Will we be missing an opportunity for council to weigh in if it's delayed here? I just want to make
Oh.
sure we,
Yes, I'm sorry, yes, we should not delay it here. It would go to the county boards in 17 or 20 days about.
And so we would not be able to get it to council before that.
Right.
the next plan commission meeting is March 10th.
What? No meeting on the 18th?
I'm sorry, the
18th.
18th, but I'm sorry.
February.
I've already missed a month in my life, sorry.
But still, that wouldn't be time for it then to go to our council before it goes to their county board.
That's
and
right.
the schedule they've got.
Yep.
So, but it has to go to the Environmental Land Use Committee of the county 2 weeks from now for its second reading before they act on it. Is that what you're telling us?
Yes, that's correct.
So if we made a contingent recommendation now, which our council could then act on, it would give the Environmental Land Use Committee time to clarify the language before they send it to the county board. And if they don't clarify it, our council has a recommendation to defeat it because it's not clarified.
All right, so what are you proposing the form of our motion would be at this?
I'm proposing that it's incredibly complicated and therefore somebody else should construct it.
Would you like me to read back what you said earlier?
Say what?
Would you like me to read back what you said earlier?
Okay.
Basically, a motion to defeat the protest if it is made explicit that parking is limited to surface parking only.
I would like to make that motion.
Do we have a second? We have a second. Maria seconded it. All right, any further discussion?
So what's the mechanism that we're I want to be clear on what we're requesting to be done. Are we requesting staff to approach them to ask for a clarification of language prior to?
But I think we're doing two things. Formally, we're sending a motion to council to act on.
All right,
And they will do that on the
15th.
15th. Okay? Indirectly, I mean, explicitly here by us, but not in a way that is part of a formal recommendation or legislative process. We're asking our staff to work with the county staff to clarify the language so that by the time our council meets, they can determine whether our condition has been met. But our staff's going to have to do that between now and then. Is that? Okay. Any further questions, discussion? Roll call. Yes.
yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. That will go to staff, indirectly to county staff, and from those two to city council. All right, audience participation, staff report.
I can just provide another update on upcoming cases. I mentioned earlier that the bike plan likely slated for the next meeting. It is going to BPAC 2 days before the next meeting, so it may or may not actually, you might not want to take action on the 18th. We'll have to just see how BPAC goes. The annual zoning map review and the rezoning of several parcels just north of the city building, commonly known as the Block North. And that is all that we have slated right now.
Okay, we have no study session, so we are adjourned.